An unidentified body lying on a quiet residential street.
The injuries were so extensive, you could not tell whether you were dealing with a male or female.
A violent individual apprehended at the scene.
He fought with them, punched out, kicked out, tried to headbutt, spat in the faces.
And critically, was this a crime that could have been prevented?
There were just a few things being said about him, like he's a bit strange. We just started seeing things on Facebook then. There was just a girl that we seen put, "Oh, you'll be next."
This murder town is Preston.
Killers are unpredictable. They can attack anyone at any time. Their motives are often varied, and chillingly, in a number of cases, their reason to kill is completely unknown. Some can be organised and planned with meticulous efficiency, whilst others are more opportunistic. They live amongst us in our towns and cities, and one thing sets them apart from the rest of society: their terrifying capacity to kill. Welcome to Murdertown.
Do you feel it in the air? Everything is changing, a world wasted by fear. Something wicked this way comes, something wicked this way comes. It's been around since time began, a million times around the sun. Something wicked this way comes, something wicked this way comes.
This is Preston in Lancashire. It sits on the north bank of the River Ribble and is home to a population of just over 120,000 people. Preston was born a textile town, one that thrived through the Industrial Revolution. It earned its status as city in 2002 and is known for being the birthplace of teetotalism.
Preston's a city, but I don't think people from Preston would ever see it as a city. It's very community-driven, people know their neighbours. Some people would say that Preston's been left behind a bit, probably in terms of the economy side of things and it growing as a city, but certainly the people, I think the people are at the heart of Preston. The main things you get from living in Preston are you're streetwise, you're thick-skinned, and you have a big heart. I wouldn't say Preston has any higher levels of criminality than any other city across the UK. Having said that, Preston, does have its fair share of issues in terms of, deprivation, drugs and gang issues. But like I said, no more than what you would see probably in other areas of the country.
Preston is a city surrounded by suburbs, and to the east lies this area, Ribbleton. It's a typical city suburb with shops, schools and pubs, and is an area of Preston that former Lancashire police detective Jeff Hurst knows all too well.
There's some organised crime, there's some violent crime, but generally it's a safe place, it's well policed, and it's a great place to come and live, work, and learn.
This is Village Drive in Ribbleton, a fairly normal residential street where nothing out of the ordinary tends to happen. But in the early hours of the 7th of February 2019, the police were called to this location after reports of a disturbance.
I took a call at 6 in the morning from a colleague who said there's been an incident. The weather was dreadful. It was extremely windy. The rain was coming in almost sideways. Police officers were there very quickly. I just needed to get to the scene and take control of the investigation.
When Jeff arrived at Village Drive, his team reported that several hours earlier, the officers first on the scene were attacked by an unidentified male.
He was drunk. He'd gone into people's back gardens and was trying to smash things up and break sheds and fences. And he was exceptionally violent. You know, it's not unusual for police officers to come across violent offenders, and they're trained to deal with it. But he was very violent. You know, he had thrown a heavy crowbar at a police officer. And you don't do that without intending to hurt them. And then the arresting officers, when they went to restrain him physically, he fought with them, punched out, kicked out, tried to headbutt, spat in the faces. He was restrained and taken into custody.
But this individual wasn't the only person discovered at the scene of the call-out.
It was just on the corner of Village Drive and Ribbleton Avenue, in the road. The body was dressed in grey sweatpants, a grey sweat top, long hair. The injuries were extensive. Blunt force trauma to the head and face. It was clear that there was no resuscitation opportunities. That person was deceased, and the injuries were so extensive, you could not tell facially whether you were dealing with a male or female.
The police who first attended the scene were overwhelmed by the victim's injuries. On arrival, Jeff was informed that both the attacker and the body discovered on the road at Village Drive were male.
It's fair to say that when I looked and the sergeant looked, we were both, neither of us were convinced it was a man, which was what we'd been originally told. I looked at the sergeant and he said, hasn't he got little feet? And then I looked at the hands, and the fingernails didn't look like a man's. So it was physical attributions that sort of caused me to question the gender. I went back to the police station, and then the crime scene manager rang me and she said, Jeff, your victim's a female.
The misidentification of gender signalled the extent of the injuries and the violence unleashed on the victim. Once police had established it was a woman who had been killed, their attention turned to who she was, who had killed her, and just what the motive was for such a brutal murder.
My sister texted me, she was like, gosh, it's a woman. I wonder who it is, I wonder what's happened. And then my mum started to panic. I was like, Mum, stop panicking. If it was Rosie, we'd know.
In the early hours of the 7th of February 2019, the body of a young woman was found on Village Drive in Ribbleton, a suburb of Preston.
She'd been so badly beaten that the police had initially assumed hers was the body of a man.
Police had also apprehended a suspect at the scene of the crime, who was immediately handed over to DCI Jeff Hurst of the Major Investigations Team.
Often we expect no comment interview. In this case, he admitted it from the off. Didn't deny it, didn't go no comment. He said he'd done it. He appeared at times to break down, demonstrating some emotion, but he never said why.
The man arrested was 25-year-old Preston local Ben Topping. At this point, he wasn't divulging the name of the victim, but meanwhile, in the community, things were starting to leak out on social media.
I woke up in the morning to go to work and seen some posts that there'd either been an attack or a murder on Village Drive. I live on that street. And then it was released that it was a female that had been found. So my sister texted me, she was like, gosh, it's a woman. I wonder who it is, I wonder what's happened. And then my mum got a phone call off a friend to say Ben Topping was arrested early hours of the morning. And I looked at her and I went, that's Rosie's boyfriend. And then my mum started to panic. I was like, Mum, stop panicking. If it was Rosie, we'd know. They'd have informed us by now. So I rang the police station and I just said, we can't get hold of my sister. There's been a murder on Village Drive and we've heard that a partner was arrested early hours this morning. Is there anything you can tell me? And they just said, really sorry, it's with special investigators. That was that. And then my mum got a phone call and it was the police and they just said, where are you? Can we come and speak to you? You know then, we knew because it was just like, what else are they going to want to speak to us about? Why would they want to speak to us? And then the police come in and they just confirmed it. It is Rosie that's died and she has been killed. What do we tell her son? I don't understand what has happened. The absolute, awful part of having to tell my nephew that his mum was gone.
The body found on Village Drive in Ribbleton was 27-year-old Rosie Darbishire.
Rosie just seemed to be a really sort of young, colourful, vibrant character, a fantastic mum. I think when you hear the words that she had a son, that's another shockwave because so many people can associate with that. You could just judge by the devastation of that community just how much she meant to them. She clearly was, this character that had an impact on people, and people just couldn't comprehend it at all.
We grew up on Village Drive. There was my mum, my dad, my older brother, Rosie, and then me and my twin sister. So there was just us 6, and we was all brought up in the house that I now live in. We lived on to the back onto some woods and some fields, so that was like our big play area as we all grew up. We had tree houses, so it was always very safe. Everybody just knew everybody on Moonhook and everybody looked out for everybody and everybody had kids that played.
The close bond remained between the two sisters as they grew into adults.
The usual sister relationship growing up. She was the older sister, so she knew better, the bickering, but we was really close. And when she did move out of our parents' home with her son, she only went and moved around the corner. Rosie was very bubbly, very loud, very crazy, very energetic. She never had the same hairstyle because she absolutely loved her wigs. She'd dye her hair bright red, bright pink, purple, green, blue. She was very wacky. She'd literally had her own personality and her own style. Everybody who she met always remembered her.
The police had been able to identify the body of the young woman they'd found on Village Drive in Ribbleton as Rosie Darbishire, which in turn allowed them to establish that the man they had in custody knew her well.
Ben Topping was a local Preston lad. Him and Rosie had known each other from going to school together, well known in the community. Not necessarily well liked from what I can hear. People sort of spoke about his anger issues, and he was known to the police.
We have intelligence systems, we have the police national computer that has records of any convictions. He was on bail for violence against a young man in the city centre. He was known in the town centre by door staff because he had the word damage tattooed on his forehead and that he'd done himself. He was just a local fella that was a bit of a wrong 'un. and there's nothing special about him.
The first we knew of it was we seen it on Facebook, the beginning of January. Rosie's in a relationship with Ben. That was the first we seen of it, yeah. So we was like, who's Ben? Like, what? She used to go to college with him, she said, at Preston College. They was just friends at the time, and then he reconnected with her through Facebook. Just sent her a message one day and they just started talking, and then they just went on from there.
Rosie and Ben Topping had been dating for a number of weeks, and while she seemed to be happy in the relationship, her friends and family had concerns.
Most people knew Rosie suffered with her mental health. She had multiple personality disorder, so she was quite up and down in a sense of in and out of jobs, trying to get herself the help that she needed, trying to get medication sorted for herself. She had previous relationships, some genuinely nice guys, some not so nice. The not so nice ones didn't really stick around, but then due to her mental health, she had abandonment issues, so she just always presumed people were going to leave her anyway, so she could push people away herself. But she kind of knew that she was doing it, but she couldn't stop herself from doing it. I only met him once. He literally popped his head in the living room, looked at us and a little smile, and then went back out the room. There was just nothing from him trying. It was more like he just wanted Rosie. He talked to her all night and she said, told us and stuff, but yet to us, he didn't want to make conversation. And at first we was like, that's a bit rude. And then when we thought about it, we thought, maybe it was just because he was nervous, you know, it's the family, people can get like that. Other than that, we knew nothing. Literally knew nothing other than what Rosie was telling us about him. But we did notice she did start to change. So Rosie was never a drinker, she couldn't handle beer. And she had started slightly drinking, not a lot, but she'd started, which was very different for Rosie anyway, because she just didn't drink at all. And then we'd seen on Facebook that she'd let him tattoo her. And we was all a bit like, it's moving very fast, but she's not telling us there's anything wrong. She's not physically showing us there's anything wrong, so there's not much we can do at the moment. We've just got to obviously just keep an eye on things. And then there were just a few things being said about him, like he's a bit strange. We just started seeing things on Facebook then. There was just a girl that we seen put, oh, you'll be next. And Rosie was like, oh, she's saying that he used to hit her and stuff and abuse her. And then obviously we started to be a bit like, well, why would she just say that? And Rosie was trying to convince us he's just a bitter ex. Preston is a close, everybody knows everybody. But there was just nobody seemed to have anything nice to say at all. Only Rosie, and obviously Rosie with the mental health, you didn't know how things were in the sense of, was he just telling her what she wanted to hear?
On the 29th of January 2019, Rosie Darbishire submitted a request to the police for information on Ben Topping using a piece of legislation called Clare's Law in the hope of dispelling her friends' and family's concerns about her new boyfriend. Tragically, 9 days later, before the police had time to respond, Rosie Darbishire was dead and Ben Topping was the prime suspect.
You could see the mannerisms, the body language. He was becoming more aggressive. At one point, he tried to trip her up. Things did seem to turn a little more sinister.
On the 7th of February 2019, the body of Rosie Darbishire was found here on Village Drive in Ribbleton, a suburb of Preston.
At the scene of the crime, the police had been able to apprehend a suspect, Rosie's boyfriend, Ben Topping.
Although Topping confessed to the crime, a confession alone is not enough to guarantee a conviction in court. DCI Jeff Hurst and his team needed to build a case.
It is rare that people are victims of homicide. And when it does happen, it creates a sense of fear often amongst communities. And communities look to the police to deal with it. The minute those police officers arrived, they were dealing with a major crime incident. They started to preserve the scene, they put a cordon on, make sure nobody can go within that scene and nobody can leave it without us knowing who they are. And anything that might have needed covering, and they would have taken steps to preserve evidence and lock that scene down. We obviously had the body. We would get evidence from the nature of the injuries. We had an offender. We would look at injuries to them and, you know, any marks on the hands if they've been punching, blood on trainers, body tissue transfer, hair transfer, fibre transfer, all the forensic opportunities.
Another key piece of evidence recovered by Jeff's team was assumed to be the murder weapon. However, this threw up a particularly baffling anomaly.
We found a number of items within that locality that were recovered and could have been used as weapons. Obviously, a crowbar had been thrown at the police office. That was recovered immediately. I think we recovered a number of crowbars. Some have been left innocent by workmen, and some of them have been hidden. They were examined, and for some strange reason, we didn't get anything forensically back from that. So, was it the murder weapon? In 30 years of policing, I have never found what I believe to be the weapon that didn't have some DNA on it, or blood, or fibre, or bodily fluid, or body matter. I've never known it. It was a complete mystery to me, and the only things that I can say is that could have been the weather. It could have been, you know, he'd gone smashing sheds and things up after he'd attacked Rosie and had that come off on his clothing and his gloves. Or he disposed of the weapon in a place where we have not yet found it. But that was the crowbar that he had, and that's the crowbar he threw at the officer. And it was just put down as an anomaly that we'll probably never be able to answer.
The lack of DNA on the murder weapon increased the importance to find other evidence to support a case against 25-year-old Ben Topping. The police were keen to try and understand Rosie's movements in the hours leading up to her death and to rule out any third-party involvement. The next decision Jeff Hurst made was to develop a strategy around CCTV.
Everywhere has got CCTV. We started off at Rosie's home address, and we followed the direction of travel to where she died, to where she lost her life. So the process is we will send your team out, you will knock on doors, you will look for CCTV cameras, and then you get to your commercial CCTV and your local authority CCTV or your private housing CCTV, and you put it all together. They had been out and they'd bought some alcohol from an off-licence. They'd gone back to their house it was Rosie's house, but he'd moved in. They were getting on fine. There was no problem between them. Rosie and Ben Topping then left the house and walked in the direction of where she was later killed. We did see them on the CCTV walking along with what seemed to be no problems. They just appeared to be talking. And then from the CCTV footage, we did see that things did seem to turn a little more sinister. Whilst there was no speech on the CCTV, you could see the mannerisms, the body language. He was becoming more aggressive. At one point, he tried to trip her up. We see that Rosie has her back to some security fencing and he is sort of stood in front of her with an arm either side of her body, almost preventing her from moving. There is clearly some dialogue between them, and then Rosie ducks underneath his arm and walks away back toward her home address, and then he walks after her, and then they go out of sight. And we established on CCTV it was all Ben Topping and Rosie. They were together all the time. They were never with a third party.
While CCTV showed no signs of a third party, that in itself didn't confirm that Ben Topping had fatally attacked Rosie Darbishire. Jeff's team, however, had identified that there were witnesses to the crime.
There was a young man who'd gone to collect some friends, and they were driving past, and they rang it in that there was one man attacking another man in the road. That individual, the driver, the male, he did get out of the car, and Topping ran towards him in a threatening manner, and naturally he was concerned for his safety. He jumped back in the car and drove off, but still contacted the police. And we know, on top of that, there was a resident who couldn't sleep. He'd stepped outside for a cigarette, and he was chased by Topping, and he was very frightened for his own safety. And he also rang the police.
The police were certain that Ben Topping was responsible for Rosie's death, but they wanted to know why he'd killed the 27-year-old.
They sort of explained that they'd gone to the off-licence, had some drink, they'd gone back to the house, there'd been a bit of an argument with somebody, one of Rosie's affiliates. They'd gone out and he attacked her and killed her with a crowbar. You know, he went after the witnesses in the car and he chased another man around the street. The important thing for me was why. What was his motivation for attacking and killing Rosie? It was a really, really thorough interview. The interviewing officer kept pursuing the question, why? Why did you do it? And he won't tell us, which I find quite despicable, to be honest. So I can only arrive at the conclusion that it's so ridiculous a reason that he's embarrassed. Because what could a person say to another to make that happen? And he should be ashamed of himself.
Although Ben Topping confessed to killing Rosie Darbishire, an attack so brutal it left Rosie unrecognisable, he refused to tell the police just why he'd carried out such a violent attack.
I'm Dr. Ruth Tully. I'm a consultant forensic psychologist, and I've been working with people who've committed serious crimes and victims for over 15 years. Topping has never publicly explained why he killed Rosie or what triggered that. The reasons for this could be anything, but it may be that he's realised that whatever triggered that behaviour in the moment was so insignificant and that behaviour was so uncalled for that he may be experiencing some kind of shame and guilt about that. He may feel quite justified in what he did. Ultimately, we'll never know, but sadly that doesn't give the family the full picture. Anger is a normal emotion, it's a healthy emotion. Everyone feels anger at some point. But some people who feel anger, or indeed other strong emotions like jealousy and so on, don't have a toolkit which they can apply to manage themselves, to self-manage, to self-soothe. Some people lose their temper, some people act violently. Quite often they're also disinhibited by other factors that contribute to that. So for example, something like alcohol or drugs. These things come together to contribute to their decision in that moment when they decide to perpetrate an act of violence. Topping used an extreme amount of violence to kill Rosie. He used more violence than was necessary to kill her. This level of injury, it's reported that she was unrecognisable, is hugely, hugely suggestive of that loss of emotional control. Quite often afterwards, people report reduced memory of what actually happened in that incident because they're so overwhelmed by emotion. I believe he spat at police officers and threw the crowbar at them, for example, may suggest that he was still running high on those emotions after he'd killed Rosie. It It could also suggest that he knew his number was up, so to speak. He was going to be arrested. He knew that he'd be in prison for a long time, and he was acting out those feelings of frustrations and emotion as well.
On the 9th of February 2019, with Jeff Hurst and his team having gathered enough evidence, Ben Topping was finally charged with the murder of 27-year-old Rosie Darbishire. But crucially, if the details of Ben Topping's violent past had come to light sooner, was this a murder that could have been avoided?
We just kind of kept raising these points with Rosie. Maybe do the closed law and check things out. Nothing might come back, but at least we will have an idea.
We know Rosie had applied to see if there's anything disturbing. She was just waiting for the results.
On the 7th of February 2019, Ben Topping violently beat his girlfriend, 27-year-old Rosie Darbishire, to death on Village Drive in Ribbleton, Preston. Rosie's friends and family had been concerned about her relationship and had encouraged her to use a piece of legislation called Clare's Law to check on Topping's criminal history.
Clare's Law is a tool to help people in potential domestic abuse situations. There's two aspects to it. There's the right to know and there's the right to ask. So the right to know is more for police to use so they can flag up without there being an inquiry. If a perpetrator is going from one person to another, they have the ability to warn that person who's in that relationship. The right to ask is where the everyday members of the public can go into a police station or apply online and ask for a disclosure.
We just kind of kept raising these points with Rosie. Just be careful, maybe do the closed law and check things out. Nothing might come back, but at least we will have an idea, because to us he was just somebody unknown.
You have to be in a relationship with somebody. You can't just meet somebody on a night out and think, I'm going to check this person out before I get into a relationship with them. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the person making the disclosure. So in Rosie's case, the sister or the mother, if they had genuine concerns for that person, they could actually make a disclosure as a third party on that person's behalf.
To appease her family and friends, Rosie submitted a request to police for information on Ben Topping shortly after they started dating.
She applied towards the end of January, and she was like, I've done it, but I know I'm going to prove you all wrong, because that was the way she was. I know I'm right, I'll prove you all wrong.
It can take up to 35 days to make a disclosure. There's the initial application. It would then be taken through to a meeting in person. Then there'd be a discussion at a third stage with the Clare's Law team in place with that police station. And then there would be the decision of whether to make a disclosure or not. So it's a very measured approach.
What we know about Topping is that he'd been arrested for violence, for allegedly breaking someone's jaw. There was a suggestion of violence in his past relationships because a past partner contacted Rosie to tell her that this relationship was going to be no good. There are lots of suggestions there of that general antisociality, and if someone's committed general violence, a twist to that could be that they would harm a partner. And this is another reason why Clare's Law is useful, to help share that information so that we can make informed choices about those who we choose to have relationships with.
I would describe Ben Topping as a selfish animal. If something doesn't go his way, you pay for it. Controlling, all the signs were there from what people were saying that he wasn't a nice person.
Quite often a perpetrator isn't violent and abusive all the time. There are periods when they're abusive and violent, and there are periods when they might, for instance, what we call love bomb the victim. So show them great amounts of affection, give them everything they need psychologically, telling them how much they love them. Perpetrators use this to their advantage. This is how they maintain relationships, and it can become more and more difficult for that victim to leave.
Rosie applied for information on Topping on the 29th of January. But tragically, just 9 days later, she was dead. Had Rosie known about Topping's violent past, her death might have been avoided. So police wanted to ensure that he was imprisoned so that he couldn't kill again.
When a family loses someone to homicide, that event, for them, it is like reading the same page of a book every day. The best that we can do as agencies is to help them read it once a month or once every 6 months. So closure isn't something you can offer, but you can just help to put their minds at rest as to a rationale why they lost their loved one. And in this case, Ben Topping won't provide that answer. He'll never stop thinking about Rosie's murder, but it might help them understand, however feeble that reason might be. It'll help them understand why they lost their daughter and their sister.
Although he never said why he killed Rosie Darbishire, Ben Topping did confess to her murder. And on the 23rd of May, 2019, he was sentenced.
So there was no trial, there was a hearing. The prosecution case was put to the judge. The defence offered their mitigation, and then the judge arrived at a sentence.
Obviously, we did see him in the court on the plea hearing. He was behind the glass box. I kept looking at him because I wanted to see if he showed any remorse, because he never gave an explanation or an answer as to why he did it. Not that anything could excuse why he did it, but there was never any explanation for any of it. Nothing. When the case was ongoing, he had to have a review done on his mental health. And we was worried because we was like, obviously, if something comes back on it, then he doesn't go to prison, he goes to a mental health institute, which is obviously not what we wanted. But then when the results came back that there was nothing on his mental health records, there was nothing in his toxicology report. So he did that of a normal, sober mind. Like, he hit her in her head and her face over 50 times with a weapon. She was already dead pretty much straight away. How can somebody just do that so brutally?
You have to get life imprisonment for murder. It's a sentence which is fixed by law, and then the judge will appoint a tariff, which means that they have to serve that time before they are eligible for parole. Ben Topping was sentenced to life imprisonment with a tariff of 20 years. So for the next 20 years, he won't be fending against anybody else. And I did take some satisfaction in that. He can't hurt anyone else.
We wanted the guilty plea just so we didn't have to go through the trial as a family, because we'd been through enough. And the trial would have only prolonged everything and made everything worse. But then, in a sense, I still don't think it's right that if they plead guilty, they do get something knocked off. He didn't deserve to have anything knocked off his sentence. But the guilty plea was definitely the better option for us as a family. Obviously, it's nothing compared to Rosie's life, but at least we know he will be behind bars for at least 20 years.
It's really challenging for me because I don't really care about Ben Topping. You know, it's sad that Ben Topping's family have lost a son to prison, but at some point he'll come out. Some obvious remorse, some sense of apology might have gone some way to helping the family, but he's never done that. And he sort of struck me that he was just accepting what was coming, and he would just get his head down and do his jail, and at some point in the future he'll come out, and that's just the way it was with him.
Most domestic abusers will be released from prison at some point. That's how our law works. Topping showed an extreme level of violence in his offending. Somebody who's exhibited such extreme violence, there'll be understandable concerns in the long term that if they were released from prison, this could happen again against a partner victim, or indeed a different kind of victim.
The murder of Rosie Darbishire highlighted the importance of Clare's law, and also the importance for the information requested on a person's criminal history to be provided quickly.
We know Rosie had applied, and we know there was a bit of family pressure for her to do that. She was just waiting for the results. Had she got them prior to the murder, I've spoken with family about this. They can't say she would have ended the relationship one way or another, but she didn't get the information as quickly as we would have preferred it to. And as a result of that, through the domestic homicide review, processes in Lancashire have now been changed, and they are much quicker. It happens within days as opposed to weeks now.
Following Rosie's tragic death, this memorial was put in place close to her home to remind this community of the vibrant young woman whose life was taken too soon, and also to show how more needs to be done to protect innocent lives from those who wish to cause harm.
What I would say to someone who might feel trapped in a relationship that might be coercive, controlling or violent would be that there is a way out. There is support out there. Speak to someone you trust. Speak to services if you don't have somebody close to you that you trust. You do not have to live with this.
This was probably the most simple homicide I've ever worked on. But for reasons I'm not sure, it is one that has touched me personally more than most others that I've investigated. You know, Rosie was a beautiful, young, energetic, vibrant woman. At the time, her son was 9, a 9-year-old boy. And it'll be one of those that I revisit in my mind regularly. I'm just privileged to have worked on it on behalf of the family.
She was a big part in all of our lives. She was the drama, but she was also the fun one. She was just so open, so honest. But it's just like the silly things you miss as well, like, I wonder what colour her hair's going to be today, I wonder what wig she's going to have on, I wonder what clothes she's going to, what colour, bright colour trainers is she going to have on. And just the fact that she was forever singing, you miss that. You definitely do, yeah. But yeah, she's missed massively. There's obviously a lot of childhood memories that none of us will ever forget, but it was just Rosie being Rosie. She had a lasting impact on everyone. You could have only met her once and you would never have forgot her, ever.